In January, following on from NaNoWriMo the previous November, I found myself with about 80,000 words written for the zero draft of my novel in progress. It is a future history with the working title Luce in New London. I was delighted to have written so much in such a short time, more than I had ever written in my life for a single version of one novel. But I felt I had lost overview. It was unwieldy. The ending was weak. There was just too much of everything. Also, some of the characters seemed to have their own ideas, different ideas, about where the story ought to be going. I decided I needed to hold the story in a different light, to come at the material again from a different direction. Maybe that would help me see the problems more clearly and perhaps figure out some solutions. To do this, I chose to transfer the novel into a software program called Aeon Timeline. Before I go on, this is the point at which I pause to ask you, if you haven't already done so, to please subscribe to this channel. It helps. Thank you. This video is the first of what I think will be a series of 2, 3 or maybe more videos looking at how I've been able to use Aeon to move the novel forward. I should say that I have no affiliation to Aeon Timeline. I am not promoting it here, and I am not making a how-to video either. I'm just talking through some of the things I learned about the software and about my novel as I worked with it. I'm illustrating what I have to say by reference to screen captures of me using Aeon Timeline. I live in Sweden, but my 102-year-old mother is back in England, and sometimes I spend time there helping out. In February 2024, I was scheduled to stay with Mum to give my sister a break and some peace of mind. This would be an opportunity to transfer the novel from the massive sheaf of Scrivener pages that I had written into an Aeon Timeline database. I bought my copy of Aeon about 3 years ago, and I opened it and I saw how complex it was, and I filed it away under sometime never. But now, in the time since I first bought it, Aeon has graduated from version 2 to version 3. So I paid a year's subscription, $35 US, to update my version, and I pestered Aeon for technical help installing it into my laptop. I needed that help, but between us, Aeon and I managed to get the program into my Acer, and I was good to go. The laptop is nothing special. It's a standard retail Acer Aspire 5 with an i5 Intel core. It's about 6 years old. The only modification I've made is to put in some more RAM. I'm telling you this so that you know it is possible to learn to use Aeon even on a bog standard laptop, but I really don't recommend it. The screen is on the small side to work with Aeon, and using a touchpad rather than a mouse is very fiddly and sometimes excruciatingly frustrating. Once I got home to Sweden again, I moved the database back to my desktop PC, and on the PC it's still fiddly, but not nearly as much. It's the PC's screen I'm capturing to illustrate this video. This is what I saw when I first opened Aeon Timeline. Obviously, there weren't any recent files the first time, but it's more or less the same. The recent files make it easy to find current work. Also, each file is identified with the exact path to find it on your hard disk, so you can always find the file if you want to copy it for backup or to move it to another computer. Luce in New London Timeline is the file I've been working on, so let's open it. Okay, so what we're looking at is the timeline as it looks at present. The novel is set about 500 years in the future, so the focus at present is on incidents distributed between May and July in the year 2500. This column of coloured dots are all the events that happen on a single day, the 21st of June 2500. It's complex enough on this PC screen, so you can imagine how difficult it was on the laptop. But working on the laptop, there were a couple of tricks in the software that helped me a lot. I've been using them on the PC too. First, you can focus on the time period you want by changing the width of the slider at the bottom of the timeline. You can get that to a quite granular level by changing the time range. Switching the right-hand range from days to hours or even to minutes or seconds allows you to make the slider encompass a narrower time range. I don't need that detail, but I do need to get down to the hourly level. You can also zoom in on your text by using the percentage gauge in the bottom right corner of the Aeon window. And of course, you can zoom out to see more. This is especially useful once you have begun to fill the timeline with events. Luce in New London, the working title, is a science fiction novel, or perhaps you might call it a future political history novel. It's set somewhere in mainland Europe, about 500 years into the future, and there are 6 point-of-view characters, one of whom is Luce herself. About 70% of the novel plays out over one single day in the city of New London, which is not London. This day is known as Gordy by New London's university students and trades apprentices, and it might as well be Midsummer's Day. It's a day many students graduate and many apprentices end their apprenticeships, so it's a day of celebration. About 25% of the rest of the novel takes place over a roughly 40-year time span before the Gordy, and the remaining 5% falls into the epilogue. Consequently, the time when events happen and when different characters observe the same event is significant. For this reason, putting the events of the novel into a timeline seemed like a good idea. Of course, I didn't really need dedicated software to make a timeline. I could have used post-it notes on a wall or an electronic spreadsheet. I've done both in the past. They have their advantages and their drawbacks. But I had Aeon, so why not use it? Trying to learn how to use Aeon, I had to figure out first where to start. I could have begun anywhere. I could have begun with the climax. I'm not giving much away when I say that a bomb goes off. Eventually, I settled on something outside the story as I had it written. I made a list of the light and weather conditions for Gordy, and that's what I'm showing you now. I know roughly where in the world New London is, and I've decided to treat Gordy as midsummer. With this information, I looked online to find the exact times for dawn, which is the period around when the world is getting light, for sunrise, which is an event that lasts about a minute, for gloaming, the opposite period to dawn, the twilight, and for sunset. I also added weather conditions, in particular the period of light rain that sweeps over the city during the later evening and through the night, and which has a bearing on the story. As you can see, there are several different ways to input time and duration. You can do it by typing, you can do it by selecting from options, you can do it by simply pulling and stretching the event marker, and you can move the event marker too. I'm adding some temperature periods here as well. Once I'd done all this, as you see, the screen was quite busy. But it's possible to nest one event inside another, as I'm doing here. This is a useful trick to keep the timeline view from becoming too cluttered. After I'd made the daylight and weather timeline, it seemed only sensible to add some timeline events for the guilds and the university students. Gordy is their day of celebration, and so there are things going on in the city connected to this, around which the threads of my story twine. I think of the weather and Gordy timelines as framework timelines. They don't really appear in the novel, but they affect and constrain the events of the story. In the end, there were more framework timelines. The coup plotters have one, for example. Yes, there is a political coup attempt and people to plot for it. Once I'd set these items up, then I could start adding the events of the day from my Scrivener text and adjusting them so they fitted with the wider picture of what was happening during the Gordy. As you can see, I've used a colour code for different events. I'll talk about that in the next video about using Aeon, when I talk about creating character cards. Back in February, in England, working on the laptop, learning Aeon and putting the zero draft into the database was a slow process. It took time because I was struggling with the laptop, but also because I was learning as I went along. I made a number of mistakes, and several times I had to take steps back to undo what I had created before I could move forward again. But I had a lot of time available. I worked while Mum was asleep or watching TV, and I did move forward, however slowly. So I learned the program, and more importantly, I learned a lot more about how my novel hung together, and in places how it didn't hang together. Aeon and my novel turned out to be a good fit. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, nor for every book, but if your story is intricate with many moving parts, maybe a thriller or a detective story, or if it's a story involving many characters where it's important to keep account of who knows whom and where they are when, or if you feel, as I did in January, that you're losing your grip on the story, then Aeon might be worth trying out for you too. Thanks for following me through this. There will be at least one more video coming later on Aeon's character cards. Until next time, cheerio.